Hi, this is KL Abhinaya of First MA English Literature at Women's Christian College, Nagarkovil. I am here to present my seminar topic on Silas Manor by George Eliot. According to the given information, let us discuss about the summary of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of Silas Manor, the Weaver of Raveloe. First, let us discuss about the author introduction. The novel Silas Manor was written by George Eliot. George Eliot was the pen name of Mary Ann Evans. George Eliot was an English Victorian novelist known for the psychological depth of her characters and her descriptions of English rural life. Her major works include Adam Bede, 1859, The Mill on the Floss, 1860, Silas Manor, 1861, Middlemarch, 1871-72, and Daniel Deronda, 1876. She was born on 22nd November 1819 at England. She died at December 22, 1880 at the age of 61 at England. Now let us get into the information about the novel Silas Manor. Silas Manor, The Weaver of Raveloe is the third novel by Mary Ann Evans, also known as George Eliot. It was published in 1861. An outwardly simple tale of a linen weaver, it is notable for its strong realism and its sophisticated treatment of a variety of issues ranging from religion to industrialization to community. It was written in the country of United Kingdom and it was published under the publisher William Blackwood and Sons. Some of the major themes of the novel Silas Manor are faith, morality, the individual and society, fear of the unknown, the limits of human knowledge. The most important characters in the Silas Manor are Nancy Lammeter, Dunstan Cass, Godfrey Cass, Molly Farren, and Silas Manor. Now, let us get into the summary of Chapter 1 of Silas Manor. The novel opens with a discussion of the superstitious attitude of provincial English peasants towards the wandering tradesmen at the fringes of their society. Such outsiders include weavers. Eliot suggests that villagers in 19th century England prefer simple, direct experience to the mysterious histories and abilities of weavers, because such men are generally distrusted by rustic society. They have tended to become aliens, eccentric, disagreeable, lonesome and mysterious. One such weaver, indeed, the pinnacle of such weaver is Silas Manor. Manor is a solitary, nearsighted, crooked man with massive brown eyes and a simple pale face who works in a stone cottage that stood among the nutty hedgerows near the village of Raveloe and not far from the edge of the deserted stone pit. The villagers of Raveloe say he has supernatural powers. Jem Rodney had seen him in a cataleptic fit, solid as stone. Marner also knows herbal arts which he learnt from his mother and which the villagers associate with the occult. But because his trade is necessary, the villagers tolerate him. Marner has lived outside Raveloe for 15 years when the novel begins, and in all that time his reputation there has not changed on it. Before Marner came to Raveloe, he had been an exceptionally bright and fervent young disciple of an esoteric sect of Puritanism practiced by the parishioners of Latin Yard. This religious community initially held him in high regard due to his cataleptic fits, which they took to be a sign of his righteousness. At Latin Yard, he was wholeheartedly devoted to his best friend William Dane and was also betrothed to a young woman, Sarah. William, jealous of Manor, hatched a plot to frame Manor and disgrace him in the community. One night, while Manor was sitting watch at the deathbed of a deacon of Latin Yard, he was struck with one of his fits. William then stole a pouch of the deacon's money and placed Manor's knife near where the pouch had been. When Manor awoke from his trance, he found the deacon dead. He rushed out into the town to inform the church elders, only to be accused of theft, but of the knife. After Mana denied the crime, the members of Latin Yard drew lots to be certain of Mana's guilt. They drew the lots and inevitably Mana was declared guilty. This twofold condemnation, not only by the trickery of his best friend, but also by the community of God, destroyed the young Mana's faith completely. He left the community of Latin Yard declaring that there is no just God that governs the earth righteously, but the God of lies that bears witness against the innocent. In the following weeks, unable to reconcile his proclaimed guilt with his self-assurance of innocence, Mana removed himself from society. Word arrived that his fiancée Sarah had renounced her betrothal to him, and within a month she married William. Mana departed from Latin Yard in despair during this chapter 1. In chapter 2, after fleeing from Latin Yard, Mana settled in the village of Ravello, a place fully unlike Latin Yard. Whereas Latin Yard had been austere, white-walled and filled with serious and devout Puritans, Ravello is a place of lazy plenty pins at the local tavern and carefree religion on Sundays. Chapter 1 declared it to be a place where bad farmers are rewarded for bad farming. In response to the trickery of William Dane, Silas Manor instinctively sought out of his loom. That habit continued and calcified with his settlement at Ravello. His first commission upon arriving at Ravello was to create table linen for Mrs. Osgood. He worked at this job into the night, incessantly hoping to finish the linen sooner than she expected. Mrs. Osgood paid him with 5 gold guineas, a sum much higher than any he had earned at the loom in Latin Yard. Thus a new, powerful force entered Mana's life. Golden money became the evidence of Mana's fulfilled effort, and in a life without any other society, the faces on his gold and silver coins became his only friends. Still, in his early days at Ravello, there were opportunities for Mana to become integrated into the society. One day, as he was taking a pair of shoes to be mended, he saw the cobbler's wife, Sally Oates, in a fit of dropsy. Because his mother had died of the same symptoms Sally Oates was displaying, Mana was able to heal her using his knowledge of herbs. The villagers concluded that Mana must be an occult healer of sorts, and they requested that he heal them too. But Mana refused their request, and they concluded that he did not want to help them. Still, in the midst of this social and spiritual withering, Mana retained a tiny remnant of affection. One day, as he was returning from the well, he stumbled on a stile and dropped his pot, breaking it into 3 bits. Though he could never use the pot again, he gathered up the pieces and fashioned them together, placing the restored pot in its old place as a memorial. Aside from this one flash of sentiment, Mana's whole existence at Ravello until his 15th year there was a cycle of weaving and hoarding his coins. Thus the chapter 2 ends. While analyzing the summary of the chapter 1 and chapter 2, we get to know that the first chapter of Silas Manor puts into the play many of the thematic elements that Eliot develops throughout the novel. First among these is a bearing that Mana's profession as a weaver has on his life, both in the narrative and as allegory. The nature of the weaver's work is solitary and to an extent antisocial. Unlike, say, a shopkeeper whose trade is tied up with social life, a weaver spends the overwhelming majority of his working life in front of the loom, disconnected from village life. Eliot emphasizes that the peasantry views weavers' solitude as well as their mastery of the complex and arcane loom as a threatening force. Male weavers tend to be viewed as belonging to a quasi-magical disinherited race and of classical weavers in literature. On another level, Mana's weaving is immediately associated with the creative process. He invites comparison with the weaver of the tale in question, George Eliot herself. This is an ancient comparison. Arachne, the weaver in Greek mythology, was said to have expressed her magical gift of storytelling through her magnificent tapestries. The 3 fates are also depicted as weavers spinning the thread of human lives out of their loom and cutting it to signify death. And like the weaver of Ravello, a writer is often removed from society, peddling her wares from village to village, possessed of a unique, uncommon, often threatening insight into the workings of the heart and the lives of insiders. Mana's betrayal at the hand of his best friend recalls the biblical story of David and Bathsheba. In 2 Samuel, King David is also enamored of Bathsheba that he causes her husband Uriah to fight on the front lines of battle in the hopeless cause. When Uriah is killed as expected, David takes Bathsheba as one of his wives. Similarly, William sets Marner up for his expulsion from the church in order to marry his friend's betrothed Sarah. Eliot invites this comparison explicitly by comparing the friendship of Silas and William to that of David and Jonathan. The biblical story of Cain and Abel also parallels the betrayal of that the more righteous brother Abel is betrayed by Cain. Marner interprets William's first act of two-facedness towards him as merely an execution of William's brotherly office. Brothers tend to fight for the patrimony. In the novel, however, Silas Marner survives and is the one who goes into exile, not the betrayal William. Marner is the one who becomes an outsider, one of the remnants of the disinherited race. This appending of the traditional story suggests the injustice of Latin yard where the innocent are banished and the guilty thrive. Marner's old affliction is described precisely. His fits are not epileptic, in which the sufferer falls to the floor in a seizure. Rather, Marner suffers from cataleptic fits in which the body goes completely rigid. He is repeatedly described as remaining completely upright, even as though made of iron, having temporarily lost his very soul. He is rendered completely insensible to God, to society, and even to the sensory world in general. These fits serve as a fairly straightforward metaphor for Marner's social and spiritual isolation. His rigid, passive character during the fits underscores the torpor that Silas finds himself in as the novel opens. He is a man lost to despair, inactive except in his arcane craft, without hope of redemption through either God or society. Chapter 2 notes the introduction of gold into Marner's life. His first taste of it at Mrs. Osgood's hands is like an alcoholic's first taste of wine. It is delicious, somehow meaningful, vaguely fulfilling, though Marner would be utterly at a loss if asked why. Ultimately, it is ruinous because Marner's coins, the weight of them, the fact of them, not the value of them, destroy his ability to value things with more than an empty meaning. Marner awaits the coin he has yet to receive from his unfinished commissions as if they have been unborn children. This is a tragic outcome not merely in that mouldering pile of coins he loved as much as a child cannot possibly love him back, but also in that Marner's love is without purpose. Money doesn't mean anything to him in terms of what it can buy. Rather, he treats it as its own society, as the gathering of friends and family of familiar faces. Sadly, Marner's narrow life in Latin Yard was limited his experience then after the betrayal. He was ill-equipped to respond to his misfortune. He makes the symbol of productive work and commodities into something to value in its own right. Even so, all of his attention is not always on money. In his betrayal, he returns to the one place where he still exerts control, his loom. As he comes to terms with the likelihood that he will never properly belong to society again, he clings to the proof of his usefulness to society, the loom of the money people pay him of his control of loom. By comparing Marner throughout chapter 2 to an insect, Eliot captures the instinctual, unreflective way that Marner finds comfort in the loom and his money. She also thus strengthens the mythic undercurrent of the work. Arachne, the mythological weaver, was turned into a spider after offending Athena, the patron god of weavers, by suggesting that she could weave better than even gods. The images of Marner as an insect also emphasize his alienation from his own race, his unreflecting and innocent nature, and the seemingly purposeless repetition of his life. Like a spider, Marner weaves to weave and to yearn, and he yearns simply to yearn. Endless contemplation of a money, a symbol of good things, is a very low form of life in comparison with contemplating good things themselves. Of all, moral values are important in Silas' manner throughout the novel, as those people who do good deeds are rewarded while those who fail in their moral duties to others are punished. As George Eliot was a religious person, she believed in fate and providence, as there was a higher being rewarding and punishing our conduct. By the way, I conclude here by saying that the major theme of Silas' Manner is, of course, the influence of pure natural human relationships, but there are several others. Some of these are never the subject of a direct statement, but constant repetition brings them to the reader's attention, and the novel draws some sort of conclusion about them. Thank you for the opportunity.